Thanks guys for coming. I think most people are here with VATSTAR. Anybody that's not here from VATSTAR other than ZLA staff?
Hi.
Oh yeah, Mr. Wong. You're like ZLA.
The party crasher.
Okay.
Yeah. He does that sometimes. Thanks guys for coming. You know, I spoke with Rob and Alex. We've been talking over the last few months about doing some events and partnering ZLA with VATSTAR. I thought it was a really good opportunity to get a lot of the pilots, especially pilots who are GA pilots, all the way up to jet pilots, connected with the controllers here at ZLA. You know, I've been on VATSIM for a couple of years now, and sometimes we often find that, you know, pilots say, hey, I hate it when you guys do this, and this aggravates me. Why do you guys have to say that, and why do you guys do this, that, and the other? And it goes the other way around, too, where, you know, we'll be controlling, and we're wondering, why in the world is this pilot doing what he's doing? And I know you guys have a really great training program there. I'm going to bring everybody together so we could talk about different perspectives. What happens on the controlling side, for those that you aren't as familiar, and then specifically a little bit about our airspace at ZLA. We'll start with an overview of ZLA airspace, and then we'll go into an overview of Southern California TRACON. And that's what we like to call SoCal, or what you guys see as SCT approach, and that covers the LA basin all the way down to San Diego, as far north as Burbank, all the way down to San Diego and out to Palm Springs. We'll talk a little bit about online etiquette, you know, VATSIM etiquette on the radio, and just good habits to have as a pilot and as a controller. Then we'll talk about VFR flight. We're going to focus a lot on VFR flight and small aircraft flight today, and Class Bravo transition in the SoCal area, and that's based on feedback that you guys gave on the forum. And then we'll have, you know, Q&A, open discussion after that. We'll start with Daniel. And Daniel's going to give us an overview of the ZLA airspace.
So we'll start from the northeast here. In the northeast corner of our airspace, we have a border with Salt Lake City and Denver. We get a lot of traffic from that area of the airspace. A lot of traffic going between Salt Lake and Denver as well. Also going between Salt Lake and Phoenix to Albuquerque there to the south. You can see there more in the center of the screen, there's the Las Vegas TRACON, which obviously serves the Las Vegas area, as well as the Nellis RAPCON, which serves Nellis. In that area, you've got the Las Vegas Bravo airspace, as well as the two deltas at Henderson and North Las Vegas. Into the north there, you also have the Area 51 complex, as most people would know it.
Yeah, this is Area 51. Is not in this little. It's right in the center of this square right here, where you see my cursor. And then what Daniel was talking about. So this is Las Vegas Airport, where you see the cursor here. And then this is Nellis Air Force Base. Over here, where the red is, you see the red, that's the Nellis Nevada Test and Training Range. And then Area 51 is right here, where my cursor is.
Alright, so there are also a few published Bravo transition routes that get used every now and again. One from the west, called the Rocks route, and then another one from the southeast called the Cortez route. Both lead into the North Las Vegas airport. The Cortez route's actually kind of interesting because it leads pretty much right through the surface area of the Bravo between Nellis Air Force Base and McCarran International, which they both share the same surface area of the Las Vegas Bravo. So even though it's one Bravo airspace, there's two airports that are kind of served by it. And then if you go to the northeast, it gets a lot simpler. There's a few airports scattered here and there, St. George, Mesquite, a few others as you get closer to the Salt Lake border, and then Cedar City's just a quick hop over. Straight out to the east after Lake Mead, obviously, is Grand Canyon. The nice thing about Flight Simulator is that you can do whatever you want and, you know, fly 1,000 feet above the Grand Canyon if you really wanted to. You couldn't do that in the real world.
Question for you, Daniel.
Nope.
And I know the answer to this, but for the benefit of the other pilots here, you said that there were some Bravo transition routes published to go through the Las Vegas class Bravo. Where would a pilot find that information?
If you go to skyvector.com and you move your view to the Las Vegas area and then turn on the Las Vegas terminal area chart in the top right, you'd see on the left-hand side the 2 published routes, and then also on the TAC chart, you'd see a set of magenta arrows that run along those published routes that are mentioned. So if you look at Nick's screen there, you'll see, if you look between Nellis Air Force Base, which is toward the north there with the 2 parallel runways, and then McCarran International, which is right in the middle there, you'll see the magenta arrows leading in for the Cortez route. And then off to the west side of the Bravo airspace, you'll see the Rocks route there.
Right. I think the key thing is, a lot of us tend to focus on just the world VFR and the world high and the world low. And one of the cool things about SkyVector is that the source charts, have a lot more information than the global ones sometimes.
Right. You can see when you click World VFR, those don't come up. But if you hit the TAC, terminal area chart, that really makes a huge difference when you look at the TAC, because it's zoomed in and it has more detail for VFR pilots.
So anyway, one of the nice things about the Las Vegas area on VATSIM is that it's not terribly busy. So if you wanted to, pop into some plane and head east, chill out over Lake Mead or something, we can generally accommodate that pretty well, unless it's an extremely busy Vegas event.
Lake Mead is very scenic because you can depart from Henderson over here, or you can depart from North Las Vegas and take one of those VFR routes and head out over Lake Mead and just let your controller know, hey, I'm going to do some sightseeing over Lake Mead. And you can, if you want, you can generally stay outside the Bravo and you have everything you need to know right here, as far as that's concerned. But also, if it's not very busy, me personally, it's really up to the controller. If it's not very busy, I don't have a problem clearing you to the Bravo and you can just head on your way.
Anyway, continuing toward the southwest, kind of. In this area, you can see the red outlines there on Nick's controller scope. That's restricted airspace. To the north, you have the R-2508 complex, which is dealing with Edwards and the military ops there. And then you also have the R-2501 complex, which sits right underneath major arrival flows into SoCal from the northeast. And then further to the south toward Yuma, you also have some additional bits of military airspace that restrict operations in and out of San Diego, so the arrivals down there usually have to climb out above arrivals going into San Diego along the J2 down there. Apart from that, between Las Vegas and the SoCal area, there isn't a whole lot going on. There's Bullhead City, which is kind of south of Las Vegas. That's pretty much the only towered airport between SoCal and L30.
And L30 is what we call Vegas. L30 is the Vegas TRACON, for those who aren't familiar.
Other than that, there's a few random untowered airports in between. There's Blythe, Daggett, 29 Palms, the military base there as well, underneath the 2501 complex. But not a whole lot going on up there. It's basically just en route traffic between Las Vegas and Los Angeles and stuff going elsewhere. So we'll continue along toward the west more. In that area, you've got Bakersfield. It's a small Delta airport. It has its own approach control facility that closes after, I think, 9 p.m. until 6 or 7 in the morning. Covers kind of the southern area of the Central Valley south of Fresno. Again, it's fairly easy airspace to, say, fly a VFR in because there's one lone towered airport in the area. And the terrain's pretty flat. Nothing that you really need to think about, I guess. If you continue toward the southeast, there's a section of the Joshua Control Facility which handles operations in the R-2508 complex I was talking about earlier, as well as operations into and out of Palmdale, and some arrival procedures into the LA Basin and Burbank. Then obviously you have Victorville toward the eastern end of the TRACON there as well. That's where planes go to die. Apple Valley a little bit further to the east, and then you have Palmdale a bit to the west there. And that's also a major point of traffic going into out of SoCal. All the arrivals for slower aircraft into Los Angeles, arrivals from the northeast coming into Burbank, and then departures out of the Burbank area going to the northeast as well. So kind of similar to San Diego, where traffic's climbing out above, going below. So they have to get planes low early for that reason. Further out to the west, you have the Santa Barbara and Point Mugu approach control facilities. Point Mugu is a RAPCON because it's covered by the DoD, and then you got the Santa Barbara TRACON, which is an up-down, which means that it's a tower control facility merged in with an approach control facility, so people at the Santa Barbara TRACON also work there at traffic control tower. In that area, you've got Vandenberg Air Force Base. You can see more red there with the restricted airspace around there. Toward the northwest, you have a border with Oakland, and got San Luis Obispo over there. And then you've got Santa Maria and Santa Barbara, of course. Santa Barbara is a Charlie airport. So flying in that area gets a little bit more complex because of the restricted airspace, as well as Santa Barbara being a Charlie airspace and there being slightly elevated requirements to operate in that area. As far as VATSIM traffic goes, fairly low density. So again, one of those areas where we can really accommodate you pretty well. But that's, as far as day-to-day goes, that's kind of the entire airspace.
Yep, I think, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have them in front of me, but I think some of our P3 training flights were set up over in that ballpark, right?
Oh yeah, Santa Barbara TRACON is this area that I have right up here on the screen, and we do have some flights over there. Santa Barbara's pretty good because there's coastline and there's some restricted areas, and there's a number of different airports over there that you can hang out in.
Very good. So VATSTAR guys, if you do your P3, if we do P3 flights in ZLA, this is the area that we'll be doing a lot of flying in.
And the good part is that Santa Barbara doesn't see like a ton of traffic, so you can do a whole lot of stuff out there if you want, if you don't want to have to worry about traffic.
Anyway, continuing toward the southeast is the big TRACON. I won't go into it too much because Nick's got his own little presentation on SoCal. But SoCal isn't a big TRACON. It's also the busiest TRACON in the U.S. in the real world. It's a very large airspace. You can see the boundary there, kind of. It goes out east to Palm Springs. It goes out west to meet up with the Point Mugu RAPCON, and as far down south as San Diego. It's a very diverse airspace. You have one of the few remaining terminal radar service areas over at Palm Springs. You've got 4 or 5 Charlie airports with Burbank, John Lane, March Air Force Base, and Ontario. And then you've got 2 major Bravo airports with Lindbergh Field and Los Angeles, and their own associated VFR procedures that go with them. If you hang out in the area kind of between March Air Force Base and the northern end of the San Diego Bravo, it's not terribly challenging. A lot of untowered airports in that area, French Valley, Palma Valley, Fallbrook, to name a few. But as you get closer to the coast, you get the added complexity that everybody loves, associated with an extremely high population density area like Los Angeles. And the airports that go along with it. You've got probably about 5 or 6 Delta airports, 2 Charlies, and the big Bravo at Los Angeles, all within about a 30-mile radius. So I'll go ahead and pass the torch off to Nick here, and he can start talking about SoCal.
Cool, thanks. Any questions on ZLA? Any more questions in general about the airspace, ZLA, anything else in ZLA anybody has any questions on?
Going back to the Area 51, let's say you want to do a Janet flight out of
Nellis or Las Vegas or something?
Nellis, yeah, out of Nellis.
Usually they fly out of Las Vegas, Janet.
Yeah, so what's the procedure for that? How does that work for going into that? Because I don't think you guys control that area, or do you control that area?
We don't control that area. Nobody has access to Janet's own proprietary departure and arrival procedures into and out of Las Vegas. What we usually give for our nav aircraft is McCarran 5 departure radar vectors to FIDO. And then there's a couple other fixes that lead into the range. And then once you get over Creech Air Force Base there, to the northern end of Nellis's airspace.
This is Creech Air Force Base right here.
That's about where you'd enter the airspace, and we just terminate you, tell you to squawk VFR, and you'd continue along your merry way to Area 51.
Okay, thanks.
I'm looking up the route here. Yeah, it takes you to Fido, Jason, and then exit is what they usually do, something like that. And I'll put Fido here on the screen. You can see where Fido is right there. But generally, you'll see this is Vegas Airport, and then I'll take a departure. You'll come over here. And then, yeah, the entry point where Daniel said will be right over here. And then you'll be on your own coming this way. I was going to try and put the route up on the screen. But you can find the route or a similar route. Because you're not going to find a route going to Homey Airport is what they call it. And that's XTA, X-Ray Tango Alpha. But you can file. What some people do is they file to Tonopah Test Range, which is TNX. That's Tango November X-ray, and then you can, which is this airport up here. But then once you enter the range again, you're on your own. We'll just terminate radar services, and you can do what you want.
I think in real life they file for the test range and then divert to whatever they go to.
Yeah.
In real life, a lot of Janet flights are VFR as well, which is interesting.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll go into an overview of SoCal, Southern California TRACON. I'm going to bring up VATSTAR, so I like that program a lot better for SoCal. So this is SoCal. This is what we see in our side of the scope. Everything that you see is SET_app. This is the area that we control. SoCal has 2 Class Bravo airports, has 4 Class Charlie airports, and then 18 Class Delta airports in it. And those are just civilian fields. Overall, I think my last count, I came up with 45 different airports and fields between civilian and military and joint use airspace in SoCal. It is very big airspace, and there's a lot. And it's very complex, but it's something you shouldn't be intimidated about, because just as much as we'll have tons of arrivals, jets coming into Los Angeles or to San Diego, there's plenty of VFR, general aviation traffic that move in and out of SoCal as well. There are routes set up specifically for VFR flight and for IFR flight as well. So there's a way for jets to get through. There's a way for your Cessna 172 or your 152. Your 150 to get through as well. So there's plenty of things that you can do. And the complexity can be kind of fun, because you can do things that require a little bit more work and a little bit more skill and knowledge than you would in some other TRACONs, which are much, much simpler and aren't as busy. So the fact that it is busy and complex can make it fun. The other cool thing about SoCal is that there's a lot of coastline. If you look here, all this area right here where my cursor is tracking is coastline, and this is Los Angeles Airport. You see right here, you see that plane landing at 800 feet. That's LAX, and you can follow that coastline all the way down here, Pacific Palisades and the peninsula, all the way down over here to John Wayne Airport, and it takes you all the way down to San Diego, which is right here. One of the common misconceptions about SoCal, and especially on VATSIM, is that it's just covering the LAX airspace or the LA arrivals. Because it's a combined TRACON, and it's called combined because it covers a number of different airports. So there are only a few combined TRACONs in the U.S., but typically TRACONs cover one primary airport and a few outliers, some secondary airports. But the SoCal started off as individual TRACONs, and then they combined it into one facility that covers a larger range to make it more efficient. And it is, I believe the last time I checked, it's the busiest TRACON according to traffic. I'll pull up the VFR chart over here. You can see LAX right here. SoCal TRACON covers all the way north. This is Burbank Airport right here. So we cover this space all the way over here. It's far north, actually just a little bit north of Burbank, just right here. Actually, this Agua Dulce Airport is just about on the edge of SoCal TRACON. And then it covers all the way down over here. It includes Ontario Airport, all the way back over here to Palm Springs Airport down here, all the way down to Cochrane Regional Airport over here, including March Air Reserve Base, John Wayne Airport, goes all the way out to Catalina Airport. That's SoCal TRACON coverage as well. And then all the way down to San Diego area, which is an area I really like. I really like the San Diego area. And it includes San Diego Airport, Miramar Marine Corps Air Station, Palomar, Carlsbad, McClellan Airport. Another popular one down here is Gillespie, and then there's Montgomery Airport, which is very popular as well. So when you come on and you see SET_app on or SoCal TRACON, any of these airports in this area, as far south as San Diego, all the way down to Brownfield, all the way as far north as Burbank and Agua Dulce over here, Santa Catalina over here, and as far east as Palm Springs Airport, is all covered by SoCal TRACON. Any questions so far?
Yeah, quick question for you on that, Nick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So what we see in New York is, of course, that's another combined TRACON that covers LaGuardia, Kennedy, and Newark. And what we see over there is that many of their controllers coming up through the ranks are only handling either just one of those 3 airports, or they're handling just arrivals for one of those 3 airports, or just departures for one of those 3 airports as they're making their way through the ranks and gaining certification to run that whole space. It seems to me that most of the time I see SoCal they're covering the whole area. Is that true, or do you guys have to subdivide that while they're coming up through the training as well, or what's the situation with subdividing of those sectors?
Yes, that's true. We do subdivide the sectors. New radar controllers are typically going to be covering in SoCal, the San Diego area. So SCT app, SoCal TRACON, covers everything combined. But we do have splits, and we have several different sectors. But generally, if you see San Diego app on, and we call it SAN app because it covers that geographical area, but it's still SoCal TRACON, so you call it SoCal Approach. And they cover San Diego Airport, and they cover everything as far north as right about here, Camp Pendleton and Palomar Airport in Fallbrook. They cover that airport all the way down south to the border. And then as far east as Ramona Airport, just right around out here. And I'll show you that area here. On ArtScope, this is what it looks like. This is San Diego Airport right here where my cursor is. And I'll show you the Bravo airspace on the map there. So that's the Bravo airspace for San Diego. And basically this area right here is San Diego. So when you come online, sometimes the big question is, who do I contact? And that's a big thing for us. If people come online and they think, oh, I don't need to contact SCT, what do they do? Well, if you come online, it's usually a good idea, if you're in the SoCal area, to check with SCT or SoCal TRACON or SAN and see if you need to contact them. And that helps us out a lot too, because we'd rather you give us a call before you just take off and then possibly cause a conflict or something like that. And it's harder to coordinate while you're trying to fly and trying to switch frequencies and figure out what you're supposed to do as well. I'm sure it's harder on that end. In addition, you'll see other the main areas. You have San Diego here, so you see SAN. John Wayne will be SNA, so you see SNA_app for this area right here, because John Wayne is here where you see this plane that's squawking 1, 2, 3, 4. He just left John Wayne Airport. You also see Ontario, ONT app. It's, again, the call sign is still SoCal Approach, and they'll generally be covering this area over here. This is Ontario Airport down here, so that's the 2 runways at Ontario. And he's covering airports all the way down to March Air Reserve Base. And sometimes Palm Springs. So you see PSP on as well. That's Palm Springs area. That's Palm Springs Airport. And that's Cochran Regional down over here.
Is it safe to say that when you're signed on as SCT Approach, it's more common that you would be covering the whole TRACON area?
Yes, the SCT app is covering everything that you see here.
If I can jump in real quick, Nick.
Sure.
SCT, when you see SCT online, they're covering everything in the SoCal TRACON unless there's another controller online. So a common thing is I might be controlling SoCal Combined, but we have a student who's certified to control the San Diego portion of SoCal Combined. So you might see SCT and SAN Approach, in which case I've given them just that sector. But you'll never see a student logged in as Combined covering just a single sector. Any person covering a single sector uses the network call sign of the airport that they're covering.
Yeah, it'll be the primary airport. So the Burbank area, you see BUR_app, and that's this area up here. And they cover Burbank, Van Nuys, the Agua Dulce Airport I told you about over here, Whiteman Airport, which is right here, and they'll just be covering this space right here.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys been working with AccuMap guys to get those sectors accurately represented in their project?
AccuMap. Where's AccuMap?
It's kind of a next generation VATSPI type thing, and
Okay.
they're trying to represent these subsectors more accurately than the generic circle that you get on VATSPI. And so they're going around to each of the facilities and trying to get information on, how the splits work. And I think there's, in certain unique cases where there's really unique splits going on, there's, some sort of little code you can put in the controller ATIS that helps AccuMap map it properly. So yeah, it might be a good idea for you guys maybe to reach out to them and give them some information on how they should be representing your sector borders when certain call signs are on.
That's a good idea. I appreciate that, because I've spoken with VATtastic, and the admin over there has limitations in his code. He's going to update it, I think, at some point later this year, maybe. But that is a good idea, and I'll reach out to them. Again, because that common misconception, when SCT app is online, it shows, if you look here on VATSTAR, it has this circle that's centered on LAX, and it goes out about this big. It's not really that much space, but it doesn't really show that we cover everything in this area here.
Right.
More so.
That's just a limitation of VATSPI and VATSTAR, which are great tools, but they just don't have the capability of knowing who's covering what exactly when all those little subsector breakdowns happen. So AccuMap is just a project that some folks are working on. It's in development. It's definitely not 100% released at this point, but there's definitely some public betas that are out there, and they're just trying to gather all these little quirks and sector information and try and get their representation of who's on and covering what as accurate as possible. So, yeah, and again, I'm not part of that team. I don't represent them, but I'm just very interested in the project because, from a pilot standpoint, it would be great to have a more accurate representation of what territory each controller is covering. So, yeah, it'd be great for you guys to get in touch with them and help them along with their project.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll reach out to them. That'll be good.
Oh, speaking of that, just say I'm flying around in some off hours and not a whole lot of controllers going on, and I'm coming into you guys' airspace. I'm squawking either VFR or was it 2200, and I'm just coming in, minding my own business, flight plan file, la 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 la. When should I be contacting you, or do I wait for you guys to prompt me to start talking to you guys?
Okay, first thing, on the squawk codes, what helps us a lot is that if you actually are VFR and you're not talking to anybody, squawk 1200, so I know you're VFR. Because if I see where you're going and you're, like, if you understand the airspace and you're avoiding controlled airspace, you're like Charlies and Bravos and Deltas, then I'm going to leave you alone. Because if you just want to fly around outside of, the Charlies, Bravos, and Deltas, that's fine. If you don't want to talk, that's cool with me. If you're actually IFR, and you just don't have a controller online, squawk 2200. That way I know if you're coming in somewhere and you're on IFR, then I'll send a contact me to let you know, hey, give me a ring. And so now if you're coming in and you see a controller online, when is the best time to contact us? It's hard to tell sometimes because, again, the VFR charts don't show. The VFR charts will show you like the Bravo airspace that you see here at San Diego, but it's not going to show you this outline of the airspace that we actually control. So if you're IFR, generally a good estimate is about 30 to 40 miles from the airport that you're going to that you're headed to. That's generally a good rule of thumb in my experience, 30 to 40 miles. If you're VFR and you're going to land at a Delta or Charlie or any towered airport, just definitely call us according to what the normal rules are. Before you enter Delta airspace, you need to make radio contact. Same with Charlie. And with Bravo airspace, you have to specifically have a clearance to enter the airspace.
Yeah, if I can jump in again, Nick.
Shoot.
If you're coming into LAX, I can see you coming for 150 miles, and it's very obvious that you're headed towards LAX. So I generally will have time to send a contact me request. But if you're coming to Palm Springs, I might not see you until you're actually close to being on the approach. So a good rule of thumb is if you're an IFR aircraft inbound, center's offline, but TRACON is online, 30 to 40 miles is good to reach out on your own, or so is descending below the transition level. If you're below flight level 180, if you're coming, if you're on descent, and you're like, normally if center was online, they might have handed me off at this point. If you get the feeling you're coming in towards an airport, it never hurts to reach out to approach. And if you're too far away, they'll just say, hey, you're too far away, monitor Unicom for another, 10 or 15 miles.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. Because if you look here, this is Palm Springs on the screen here, and this is about 40 miles out where my cursor is. See, it says 40. Yeah, and the border here that SoCal covers is right here at 22 miles. So if you call this about 40 miles out, that's about enough time for us to get you together before and sequence to come into Palm Springs.
And that's where center would normally hand off an aircraft if we were both online anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people think about the borders of TRACONs and centers as like, oh, I don't have to do anything until I hit that border, which is true. But in a world where everybody's online, there are agreements and coordinations, so we can actually talk to aircraft before they're technically in our airspace.
I think one of the big misconceptions among newer pilots is the difference between the Bravo border and the TRACON border, which I think you guys mentioned while I stepped out of the room for a second. But yeah, that's really helpful for us to know. I know that there are some ARTCCs that are putting TRACON borders up on their websites, because that's the one thing that pilots don't have access to among pilot charts. Don't show TRACON borders. They just show the Bravo borders and they show center borders, but they don't show the TRACON boundaries, and there's not really a public pilot resource that shows the TRACON boundaries. So that's one thing I've been encouraging ARTCCs to post somewhere on their website under pilot resources, just so there's a better grasp of when a pilot should be talking to an approach controller.
Another thing I'll mention is that SoCal TRACON covers generally up to about 13 or 15,000 feet. And then if you're coming in, if you're flying a jet and you're coming in on the Angel Hollywood arrivals, that's what this guy's doing right here. You see the Alpha Bravo Delta guy? He's coming in on an arrival. That starts at flight level. This area right here starts at 190. So if you're coming into LAX on a STAR terminal arrival procedure, you probably want to give us a call, probably about flight level 200. Somewhere around there is good for us. But anywhere else, probably about 15,000 feet, 16,000 or so. Just like he said, if you're passing transition level, 18,000, flight level 180, that's a good time to start dialing the frequency and listening what's going on. Any other questions on SoCal? Cool. Well, we'll go right into, since Mr. Reed is here, we'll spend about 5 or 10 minutes on VATSIM and controller and pilot etiquette from both sides of the fence. Mr. Reed here is a supervisor, a network supervisor, and he's one of our long-time, more senior controllers here at ZLA.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so I'm going to touch base on a couple of things that were just mentioned about calling controllers and whatnot. I'm going to just go off a couple of things. I'm going to start with a couple of don'ts that I see happen on a frequent basis in the U.S. Compared to other procedures around the country, around the world, I should say. A couple of don'ts that I do see are, for example, aircraft, when I'm on working center on my own, they tend to ask me what their arrival runway is at least 300 to 400 miles away from the airport. And honestly, with the way that sometimes the weather can be volatile in places like Las Vegas or Los Angeles or San Diego, sometimes we do have to do changes on the whim. So it's a good idea not to ask what your runway assignment is on center and just wait until you get closer to the terminal airspace. My usual answer, if I do get that question, is I let the aircraft know that you don't usually get your expected runway assignment, or sometimes that we do have aircraft that are descending via arrivals. We'll clear them for the approach pretty early in Los Angeles on their descent. But I usually tell them when they're about 60 miles away or upon entering the terminal airspace, whichever comes first, to expect your runway assignment. And then I also remind them to check the ATIS if it's available, and if it's in range, make sure that's one of the first things on your mental checklist is to check what the ATIS check what the runways in use are, but don't automatically select runway in your FMC. Just wait until the controller gives it to you.
Can I butt in right there?
Yes.
The ATIS, that's a very important topic. Definitely check the ATIS. It makes life easier for us. Whether you're in a 152 or 172 or you're flying a 777, when you check the ATIS before you come on frequency, typically a good time to do that is when you start your descent. And when you check it and you come on frequency and you tell us right away what your altitude is, your current altitude, not what you're descending to or what you were assigned, where you're actually at, and you tell me I have information echo, which is if echo is current, that makes life a ton easier for me. That means I don't have to read you the altimeter. I don't have to tell you I don't have to give you anything special. It saves time on the frequency. All I have to do is clear you for an approach or tell you what vectors or what to expect, what approach to expect. It saves a bunch of transmissions going back and forth. And when people report with the ATIS, for me personally, you get a cookie. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that. I mean, if anybody that reports in with a good check-in or an ATIS or something like that, I mean, it makes our life a whole lot easier and saves at least 30 seconds to a minute of transmission time with each aircraft, and that's very beneficial for us in an event setting. And that goes that not only goes from being in the air, but also being on the ground as well. If you call in with the ATIS and what have you, that makes life a whole lot easier. We can get you going on your way a lot more quickly.
And if I can jump in on that real quick, Nick.
Yes, you may.
Checking and reporting ATIS on initial contact is part of all of our P4 and P5 check ride checklists. So you are, if you're taking a P4 or a P5 check ride with us, that's one of the things you're evaluated on, is whether you check the ATIS and reported that upon initial contact. And on the departure end, it's with the clearance and or the ground controller, and on the arrival end, it's when you're handed from center to approach.
I think Edward had a question, or was it something?
Yeah, Jack Howard, I believe you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know that when I fly into LA, I know what side of the airfield I'm parking on, and that's usually probably what the side that you assign the runway for, so I just plan ahead and put that into my FMC. Is that right, or should I be waiting for you guys?
Honestly, I would still wait until we give you your runway assignment. A lot of us controllers do know where you park, but
I think that's more of a pilot technique type thing there. I think there's a technique to how you want to build your box. If you want to build it, with the assumption you're going to get. I know we do all the time. Like we'll put something in there because we expect it, and then we'll just change it.
If you're comfortable changing it, that's fine. Just don't get upset if we have to put you somewhere else.
That's the important thing, because for operational necessities, we may need to put you someplace else to try and fit you into the hole on the approach. So,
if you look on the screen here, just for the guys interested in LA arrivals, if you look on the screen, this is the LA arrival area that you see. I got rid of all the other sectors. There are 4 sectors that cover LA arrivals. And this is how much space we have to deal with for aircraft that are coming in. So if you're coming in from the east, where you see this guy that has 19 or 8 or 2000, this guy right here, if you're coming this way from the east to come in, we have this little narrow corridor to fit all the traffic that's going into LAX, like you see these guys here. If you're coming in from the west, this guy right here who's coming in down that stream, that's all the space we have. So if we move you, it's really for a good reason, because if you're coming from one direction here, we got to put some other people on the north side. It's just really, that's all the airspace we have, because SoCal is so complex and crammed.
I'm going to add another thing as well in terms of talking about operational necessities and whatnot. There are times where I do see aircraft fly into LA. They will sometimes go opposite direction and land on the 6s and 7s when it's not necessary. We do try and catch that whenever, say for example, I catch far out. I do look and see if they're on those arrivals. But I would say, unless the winds, this is kind of technical, but forgive me, but 99% of the time, LA is landing to the west, the 2-4s and 2-5s. So if you always just assume that you're going to land towards the west on the 2-4s and 2-5s. It's very infrequent these days that aircraft do land on the 6s and the 7s, because the winds, I believe the wind component has to be greater than 20 knots for them to sustain 20 knots before they change to the east operating configuration, and that takes a lot of work to switch that around if we're online already. So just always plan on assuming landing west unless you really do see the winds drawn out of the east.
I'm gonna jump in with one comment before we
sure go ahead.
To give you the pilot's perspective on some of the runway switches, for the longest time and many years, I flew nothing but the default airliners. I was adamantly against shelling out money every time a new add-on came out. So I flew based on what was included in the FSX package, and I've programmed routes into the FMC, and you're kind of stuck with what you got. I think that might be, not always, but that might be where some of the resistance comes to being switched from the 2-4s to the 2-5s, because you've programmed in this certain path and you can't change it without completely destroying your flight plan. So what would you recommend to pilots? And I know I've since seen the light and went ahead and shelled out for the PMDGs, but what would you recommend to pilots that are just learning how to fly airliners and they're still on default equipment and they're not able to alter the route in their FMC?
Nick, do you mind if I take this question?
I'll actually answer one part, and then Mr. Kramer, if you don't mind, I'll default to you. One part is I would just definitely say have a good reference of the charts, and if you have any problems, don't hesitate to ask us. We don't bite. I mean, we can gladly give you the ILS frequency for the runways that you're going to be changed to, and we can easily give you vectors to the approach. That's no problem at all. That's part of our job.
If you're flying a default aircraft with a default GPS and you're trying to stick to your magenta line, that's fine. But I always wish pilots would go find a resource and learn how to do basic instrument stuff, basic ILS, basic navigating, because. And I mean, you know, Rob, what it was like simming even 15, 20 years ago. Now we have YouTube, and there are so many tutorials out there and ways to learn how to just do a basic, tune the ILS frequency, tune the course knob, and follow the instruments down to where you need to go. That I understand the resistance in having to change around a whole GPS flight plan and not being aware of what to do, but it doesn't take a lot, I feel like. And so my one big wish list for pilots is the default aircraft all can do basic radio navigation.
Right.
And a lot of the default GPSs have some version of an old approach in there somewhere that'll get you roughly where you need to be.
Right, and that's kind of one of the reasons that I've been so passionate about trying to bridge this gap and teach radio navigation as part of these ratings. Not necessarily P2, but P3 and P4 definitely we teach radio navigation in addition to automated flight, because I just found it personally a skill. Well, first of all, when I first learned how to fly airliners in a simulated environment, that's all I had was radio navigation. So it was what I grew up on. But by the same token, it's it's a skill. It's a great fallback skill to have, and just for this kind of situation. And believe me, I'm asking on behalf of newer pilots. I myself understand the answer to the question.
Oh yeah.
So
no, well, and the other thing I would add too is if it's not a cloudy day, a visual approach is a perfectly acceptable thing. And I feel like there's a lot of pilots are scared to do the visual approaches also.
Yes, I will.
Because they're hard.
Yeah, I will add to that point. Yeah, they are hard, and I think that's a bridge that needs to be gapped at another time.
And then lastly, if you put in your flight plan remarks default GPS, then that helps tremendously, because then I know what you're capable of before giving you the instruction.
The basics, if you're flying a jet, if you know how to program and hold altitudes, speeds, and headings, that gives me everything I need to get you where you need to go. If you can hold altitude, speeds, and headings properly, I can vector you to an approach to an ILS or something like that, or for a visual approach.
Perfect. That's a perfect answer, guys, and I appreciate that, because I know that's one of the things that a lot of new to VATSIM folks that haven't found some of these high-end add-ons yet have the biggest fear about, and that's like, what happens when I get pushed off of the route that I have programmed in? And most of them go, "Oh, I'm screwed," and that's why the disconnect comes. So that's one of the things I try to do is get them over that fear.
Yeah, and no, I think the thing is that the fear is, and I'll just go back to what I said, we do not bite. There's no fear in asking for any sort of assistance. If you want vectors, we'll definitely be happy to accommodate that. One point, and I don't mean to be blunt about it here, but we do tend to have a lot of aircraft, specifically on one specific departure out of Los Angeles. It was formerly known as the Loop departure. It no longer exists, but its RNAV equivalent is the Orca 2 departure. It calls for a left turn heading 221 after certain fixes for vectors back to the Clipper intersection, but aircraft tend to turn right on the departure immediately after passing those fixes, and in turn they will go into the arrival corridor for aircraft landing from the north. Always have a chart handy and ask questions if you have problems with if you have a question about how the departure procedure works. If we have time, depending on workload, we can accommodate. We can answer your question and clarify that. But in all honesty, I mean, it's a good idea to look at your departure or arrival chart to make sure that you are flying the procedure correctly. I cannot tell you how many times over the last 7 or 8 years that I have controlled center on this network where I have had to chastise aircraft kindly that you are not following the departure procedures published. You'll see here that off the north complex, it would be runway heading past the first two fixes that you see, Fabro and Delray, and then you'll be given vectors to the Clipper intersection, and then for the south complex, it's a left turn heading 236. So if you follow the dotted lines, that would be a telltale sign of what your controller would expect you to move. So with that being said, I mean, don't feel like we're working against you. If you're as a pilot, I mean, if you feel like a pilot, don't feel like your controller is working against you. We just have a certain section of things that need to be adhered to and procedures that we have to follow.
You know, try and be patient. You know, remember that in a lot of cases, just like we talked about SoCal and how many airports that are being covered by one person, it is a lot. And so sometimes it might take a little bit of time. But if we try and be patient with each other, and we know sometimes you guys are learning, it makes for a better experience for everyone.
Nick, I'll just add one more thing. If you request a VFR flight following, and if there's only a center controller on, and we say call back in about 5 or 6 minutes, know that we're not trying to forget you, but just know that we're extremely busy with other aircraft, and just don't feel like we're leaving you out. That's another thing I just want to point out. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Cool. All right, so let's move right along into VFR and Bravo procedures. I know you guys are looking forward to that, and you guys voted, hey, we want to know about VFR flight in the SoCal TRACON. We want to know, what do we need to know about flying as a VFR aircraft, you know, if I'm flying my Cessna, my Skyhawk, or if I'm flying, you know, my Pilatus or something like that. And, you know, how do I get to the Bravo? So we'll start with Matt Kramer. He actually flies out of the Burbank area, so we'll start with him, and he'll give us a little bit of brief on the Burbank area, and then we'll go right to Ethan, who is very familiar also with SoCal, and who has flown out of the San Diego area for some time.
Alright, so I'll jump in on SoCal. I've started sharing my screen in the Hangout for those of you who are there if you'd like, and I pulled up SkyVector here. SoCal airspace, the Los Angeles area, is really great for VFR, and it's really a ton of fun. There's so much diversity and variety, and I think I was talking to someone about this the other day. In a 50 nautical mile radius, we have anything you can imagine. Complex Bravo Charlie airspace, big flat open spaces, mountainous terrain, coastline, city. It's all here for us. Because of the complexity of the Bravo airspace, as a community in the real world, we've worked with the FAA for a number of decades on these VFR transition routes. And you can see on SkyVector here, we've got a bunch of them. They're the magenta arrows that go up and down all through the Bravo airspace. And they're designed specifically for a number of different situations for where you might need to get from, say, up here north or coming from Santa Barbara to go down south towards these parts of SoCal. The most famous route that people love is the mini route and the LA Special Flight Rules area. This one here, the mini route, takes you right over the Los Angeles International Airport at 2,500, and the Special Flight Rules takes you over at 3,500 and 4,500 respectively, depending on your direction of flight. It's gorgeous. I'm sure you've all seen on airliners.net and various other photos of LAX from above. It's really cool, and it's really easy to get that from us here on VATSIM. All you need to do is ask whatever controller you're with for the mini route southbound or the mini route northbound, and that's it. And flying through it is very easy. All you have to do is follow the Santa Monica 128 radial, tune it in, maintain 2,500, and that's it. And again, we were talking about Vegas earlier in SkyVector. When you pull up the terminal area chart, you can sort of scroll over and see the supplemental information, which is really convenient, because if you're just in World VFR, it's going to sort of stitch everything together, so you're always seeing terrain. But when you pull up specific charts, you can look at not only the supplemental information provided, but also the chart key. It's a super convenient resource.
Yeah, that's the menu right there. You see those arrows. For those who are able to see my screen, if you haven't seen Matt's screen.
And then the Special Flight Rules is very similar to the mini route. The only difference is that Special Flight Rules doesn't require talking to air traffic control at all. You do have people who don't like getting flight following, or maybe SoCal is just super busy with arrival traffic and they're not providing VFR radar services. But you still need to get northbound or southbound to the Los Angeles Class Bravo. You can do the Special Flight Rules area, which is almost the same route as the mini route. It's a slightly different radial to keep you off of the mini route's radial to keep the targets from converging. But Southbound, you fly at 3,500, you squawk 1201, and you just maintain that 132 radial until you're clear of the Los Angeles Delta airspace. And then northbound, it's the same thing, only you're at 4,500. And you can see, if you're on SkyVector or if you're looking at one of our screens, all of that's depicted on the chart here. You have Los Angeles' Delta airspace to the north and south at 2,700 to the north and 2,500 to the south. And then you have the narrow surface area of the Bravo, 10,000 to surface. That's the sort of shaded in section. In the real world, you're asked to report things like LMU or Bologna Creek or Imperial Highway. I tend not to ask for that on VATSIM because not everybody has really photorealistic scenery, and even among those who do, they might not know what those things are. The beauty of VATSIM is we have perfect radar coverage, so we can always see. The mini route you can ask for either in the air when you've got flight following or on the ground at any airport. You'll get assigned a squawk code to get through, and you'll receive your Bravo clearance. The one thing to make sure is that you do not, if you're on the mini route, do not enter the class Bravo until you've heard the words "clear to enter the class Bravo." And that's true of any time you want to try and transition to class Bravo. The special flight rules is special because it's an exception to that, where you don't have to be talking to anybody as long as you're following that procedure. It's a little carve-out in the class Bravo for VFR traffic.
Quick question. Since you did mention the VFR reporting points, did you want us to call those in, or that just confuses controllers?
Most controllers should be familiar with them. On the mini route, you shouldn't have to, but if you're flying around VFR, say, and you want to call up for flight following, absolutely call with the VFR reporting point. We have, and maybe Nick can pull it up on his VSTAR's scope, we do have the ability to see each of the VFR reporting points. Most people who are working SoCal will have some familiarity with where the basic ones are.
Yeah. Yeah, with the basic ones, sometimes they're actually on there, like the Hollywood Bowl, you'll see right here, and it's actually depicted on the map, so we know where that is. We know where Santa Monica Airport is. Obviously, we know where the airports are. If you ask for something else that's like a VFR reporting point, we can pull this up. Most of them are familiar with the map, and then they can pull it up and figure out where you are. Also, freeways as well. If you have the freeways, you're familiar with the freeways, we can pull that up too.
If you're worried about it, the best way to report to a controller where you are is the number of miles and cardinal direction you are from an airport and your altitude. In order to radar identify you, we need to verify your position and your altitude. The other routes we have, Coastal Route, the Hollywood Park Route, and the Coliseum Route, those are much higher than the mini route and the special flight rules. And that's intended for aircraft who don't need to be in Los Angeles, but just need to get through it. Obviously, being above 10,000 is difficult for little propeller aircraft, and it's difficult to transition the Los Angeles basin without having to either go above or around the Bravo, which could add undue time and constraint to your flight plan.
Here's the Coliseum route and the Hollywood Park route. Again, you can find these on SkyVector. It shows you exactly what to do.
They're almost straight lines through the airspace, and the way these are designed, they are positioned such that you won't run in. They're deconflicted, we call it, from all of the other arrival and departure traffic into the Los Angeles airports. And it works exactly the same way as the mini route, either on the ground or in the air when you call up a controller, say, Cessna 12345, 3 miles north of Van Nuys, 8,000, request transition to Los Angeles Class Bravo via the Coliseum route.
Right, the whole purpose of having a published route is that it's something that's easy to follow, you only have to give one instruction to do it, and then we're suddenly out of your way of all your arrival and departure streams.
Exactly. And then you'll get Cessna 12345 cleared to the Los Angeles Class Bravo via the Coliseum route, maintain VFR at 8,500 or at 9,500.
And that's what we mean. You fly VFR just as much as jet traffic comes through. There are ways to get through as a Skyhawk or a 152 as well. There are ways to get around.
And because you're VFR, you'll see on the inserts for these routes, you have a couple of major points depicted. On the Hollywood Park route, you've got Van Nuys, Hollywood Park, the actual, what used to be the racetrack, which is now a pit, and will soon be the Rams Stadium, and the Queen Mary depicted. If you don't have your VORs working, you just follow those visual reference points. And it's the same on the mini route. You've got LMU depicted, LAX, the marina there, and the freeways. So you can do all of these by reference to the ground. And it's it's really convenient, and once pilots start to get to know how to use these, it can really make your VFR day so much easier, and especially if you have something like Orbix SoCal, or you're an X-plane and you're using photoreal scenery or terrain meshes, it can really add a lot of immersion and realism to the things that you're doing. Other VFR things in the LA Basin, it's pretty simple, really. Most of our airports are deltas. We have a couple of uncontrolleds. When SoCal or center's online, we provide top-down services, so ground all the way up to center. Flight following is available 95% of the time. And otherwise, you can even see in the Class Bravo and the Charlie airspace, there are a lot of exceptions. The only places you really can't fly are right in the arrival streams of the airports. But you could do an entire tour of downtown Los Angeles without talking to SoCal if it was your prerogative. And then the last great thing about us is it's VFR or VMC outside 95% of the time also. So very rarely will you have to call for like a pop-up IFR or get stuck. And I think that about covers VFR. It's highly encouraged. I always like when pilots do it. It's such a great break from the normal like cleared ILS 25 left. Were there any questions or anything that you wanted me guys to go over?
Yeah, I did have a question about clearance delivery. Okay, just to give an example, during the the Oscar event you had a couple of weeks ago, I was flying a 747 out of Seattle down here. You guys published you guys wanted the Ironman 1 arrival. I'm there messing around with PFPX, and somebody doesn't want to give me the Ironman 1 arrival, so I'll jump over to SimBrief, and then it gives me like 3 different routes to choose. Like, okay, I just pick one, and while we're in Seattle filing for like clearance, they decide to, they didn't like that one, they gave me another one. I'm just like, no problem with changing it because I'm still on ground. All I gotta do, okay, lost like what 10 minutes because I already punched in one with my FMC, but not that big of a deal. It just, what do you guys do when somebody files a clearance and you're gonna authorize it? Do you guys do anything special that I need to worry about to make sure which clearance, or like how do I build my flight plan and file it?
Yeah, so one thing to note about SimBrief, and I actually know this myself for a long time, but those routes that SimBrief gives you, I'm fairly certain that those are just the most recent routes that were input into SimBrief on that same segment. All that's happening when it gives you, like, you put in 2 airports, for example, Seattle and then LAX, it's just giving you what the most recent briefing was used, or what route was used most recent briefing. So there's no guarantee when you're using that it's going to give you a route that's valid for the current operations. Because, a lot of times the big changes you'll see when it comes to routes is, when you haven't left yet and your clearance is going to have to do with the departure procedure or the arrival procedure changing. And at a lot of airports, those departure and arrival procedures are runway specific, depending on which direction the airport is going. Some places like Denver, they were really poorly designed, kind of, in my opinion, in that way, where their arrivals can only work for one runway configuration at a time. So they have to change it constantly. So you'll see aircraft, actually it happened to us going out of Houston the other day. It happens all the time. So they'll file us something, and then we'll get the PDC back, and it'll be something completely different because when they filed it, their winds were going the other direction.
And to add on to that, I think what I like to use when I fly is FlightAware, because FlightAware is real data. And like I said earlier, we typically use the operations that are current in real life. So if LA is landing west, which it is most times, we're typically going to have it west online on VATSIM. And so FlightAware typically has the most recent routes. You can go on there if you look at the screen and then pick out a route. You can type your destination, your origin and destination, and pick a recent flight that's on there en route, scheduled around the time that you're going to be going.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that resource for route building. It's probably the best you're going to get.
And you can see the route right here. Boom. That's pretty much what you need.
I feel like a lot of people use PFPX and grab an auto route, but it's a very powerful tool for you to design your own flight plans based on current weather, sort of, and be your own dispatch. But its rules aren't necessarily the rules of what's happening in real life, and as Ethan said, even real dispatch sometimes gets turned around. But the other thing to do is to verify when you see an arrival and a departure given to you on a route, go look at the chart and make sure it's actually valid for what you need.
That's what I was going to say too. As well, make sure if you're flying a jet, find a route that's appropriate for a jet. If you're flying a turboprop, get a route that's appropriate for a turboprop, because they are slightly different. The arrivals may be different, or the routes might be different if you're flying a turboprop.
I've had it be a couple times where you have a 747 coming down on an arrival that's designed for turboprops.
Cool. So we still have a few minutes. We only have a few minutes left. Anything else for Matt? If not, we'll move right along. Ethan is going to discuss some more VFR procedures in the SoCal area, mostly in the San Diego and coast area and Palm Springs, Ontario. He's very familiar with the SoCal area, flying around there as well.
Yeah, man, I think Matt really hit the big things there with the Bravo transitions. San Diego is sort of an interesting place because I believe it was one of the first, if not the first, Bravo airspaces that was ever built. And if you look at it, it's kind of a bizarre shape. There's a lot of really weird shelves, and it is kind of confusing, to be honest. Also, it's another one of these, like Vegas, where there's multiple primary Class B airports. A lot of people don't realize that. Miramar is also a surface Bravo airport in the San Diego Class B, so you have Lindbergh and Miramar. But if you just look at it, I mean, it's sort of a weird shape.
San Diego, transiting to Bravo, it's like over through San Diego.
Yeah, so San Diego has a special flight rules situation similar to what LA has, that sort of runs down the channel and through the bay there. Just a little bit to the west of downtown San Diego. And I believe, it's not actually used that often. I think they call it a corridor down there, but it's actually not used that often. People tend to just sort of navigate under the Class Bravo more than anything else in San Diego, or just around it. San Diego has a few uncharted Bravo transitions.
There's one that I think we teach a lot, the Delta transition. That one's that we teach.
Okay, yeah, so there's a few. The two main transitions that are used that you'll see, which granted are primarily for sightseeing, and that's the only time I ever used these, and the only time I know of anybody ever using these is for sightseeing. It's not an efficient way to really go anywhere. But pretty much you would call up by Crystal Pier, like near Mount Soledad, and ask for a transition down the shoreline below 500 feet. They would give you a clearance into the Bravo right down the shoreline at 500 feet, and you take that all the way down to Point Loma, and you would end up, that transition comes from Lindbergh Tower directly, so you'd call Lindbergh Tower, and then you get handed off to North Island Tower. Obviously, for our purposes, we typically don't have a different controller on North Island, so it'd just be one person. The taxiway Delta transition, pretty much there's San Diego's Lindbergh Airport is pretty much just like one runway and one main taxiway right next to it. But there's another taxiway that runs perpendicular to it almost, to the runway. That sort of faces north-south, and that's taxiway Delta. So they'll authorize Bravo transitions going basically right over the top of Lindbergh Airport and then just west of downtown there. And the altitude varies. It tends to be at 1,000, but I've gotten it at 1,500. I've gotten it at 2,000. It just kind of depends on the traffic. And it's multi-directional, and they'll also stack aircraft on top of each other. Which I wanted to mention, they actually do that on the mini route too, and a lot of people don't know that. They will stack airplanes on those transitions as well. But yeah, those are the two main Bravo ones for San Diego. And, San Diego tends to be mostly coastal traffic, and then people sort of branch off once they get around Mount Soledad. They branch off and go to either Montgomery or Gillespie, or people will come all the way around sort of on the eastern edge and go under the Bravo out there. Anything else about San Diego you want me to touch on? Oh, 2503 might be worth mentioning.
Sure.
Yeah, so that restricted airspace, 2503.
That covers Camp Pendleton. Camp Pendleton is in 2503, this area that you see here on the chart.
Usually the low one is active and the high one is not. The ones to the west, or to the east, B and C, those are almost always active, at least in my experience. But A and D, the one that's over the shoreline and is higher up, I believe it's like above 2500, that one tends to be cold. So like usually when you're transiting there, if you're talking to approach, you can always ask them, is the airspace hot? And for our purposes, it's almost always going to be cold because we're on VATSIM. You can transition right through there. I mean, I've never actually, I don't even know if I've ever had to actually deviate offshore to go around that Camp Pendleton restricted airspace before in my experience. You can always ask controllers when you're flying, especially when you're VFR. What's the status of this airspace? Is this a safe routing for me? They're going to try and keep you out of trouble, and we'll do the same thing.
If you're in SoCal, if you call it for flight following, then that helps us because we know what you're going to do. We're talking to you, and we can tell you, hey, the restricted area is in use, so we can tell you about traffic. It's always a good way to know. When in doubt, there's nothing wrong with flight following. It helps you, it helps us.
Guys, this has been really fantastic.
I appreciate you guys coming. So now we're going to prepare to staff up SoCal area. Is there anywhere that you guys would like to see staffing or things that you guys would like to do this afternoon? We're going to give about 2 hours of staffing.
Well, I can speak for myself and say that I'm definitely going to boot up, Egg Beater and do some VFR flying around SoCal. So hope to see, some of the SoCal TRACONs on.
Any particular areas, airports?
I'm going to try and do the mini route or one of the transitions across LA.
Cool.
Yeah, I may follow you on that, Ed.
Okay, a good thing to note also, typically with the mini route, it usually starts with Santa Monica or Hawthorne Towers. You're going to call first, and then they'll send you over to LA Tower. If you don't see, Hawthorne or Santa Monica online, you'll talk to Approach first, because they'll be covering local. Remember, it's top down, and then they'll switch you over to LA Tower for your Bravo clearance, and then LA Tower will switch you back over to Approach.
A question on that: what happens if there's only Tower online?
Just LA Tower, and nobody else? Then just call LA Tower before you enter the Bravo. Probably about 10 miles before you enter the Bravo is a good time to call, so he has time, especially if he's busy.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention, in the real world, because everyone's open all the time, LA Tower owns the surface Bravo in that area. And so if you're doing this transition in reality, you switch to Santa Monica to ask for the mini route clearance. They coordinate with LA Tower. You switch to LA Tower when told to do so, and then LA Tower actually switches you to Hawthorne Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And Hawthorne Tower will ask if you want flight following to wherever your destination is.
Yeah, just like on the sectional chart, you're going to see the big airspace, but what we see is that there's certain airspace that's delegated to Approach, certain airspace that's delegated to Tower in different areas. It just really depends. But just listen carefully for the frequency that you're given. With VATSIM, of course, not everybody's always open, so just listen very carefully for the frequency.
Yeah, with VATSIM, 9 times out of 10, Approach or Center will be online, and if it's just them, they'll do everything. If LA Tower's online, you're treating Approach or Center as the Santa Monica Tower or Hawthorne Tower, and it's the same for any of the other Delta airports. So when we say top down, from a pilot's perspective, it should just be, you should think of it as bottom up. So if you're on the ground at Van Nuys and Van Nuys Tower's online, great, we'll just call Van Nuys Tower. But if SoCal's online, SoCal is Van Nuys Tower for your purposes.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you guys you particularly want to do? Because if you guys are going to do like mini routes and stay in the LA area in the north part over there, then what we'll do is make sure there's some staffing over in that area for you guys.
Very good, Nick. Thank you so much for putting this together. This is fantastic, and I'm going to be posting maybe a abridged video of it on our YouTube channel as soon as I get a chance to edit it down. So thanks for putting it together. Very informative and good information.
Cool. Thanks for coming, guys.